In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. So yesterday was a very full day for me. Woke up, took Henry to swimming lessons, and then after that went to a birthday party. And by the way, we don't have a car these days, so that meant a various combination of TTC, taxis, and dragging my 5-year-old through the snow in a sled and things like that. Anyway, so we get to the birthday party. We get to the birthday party, rush home, manage to get changed in time, get picked up by a car from the funeral home to do Muriel's funeral, and then came home. Decided to stop here, got home, had a late dinner, put Henry to bed, spent about an hour just kind of watching TV and kind of like regrouping as a human being. And then I sat down and started the vestry report, the annual vestry report of the church. Churches, just like other nonprofits, have to have an annual meeting in which we discuss how things are going, where we're going for the next year. We talk about our financials, we appoint officers, all that kind of good stuff. So I start working on that, and at a certain point, around 4:30, I had laid out most of the vestry report, but I was starting to get to the point where I actually had to use my brain to do stuff on the vestry report. Specifically at this point, I had to total up the numbers for attendance and to calculate the averages for various kinds of things. So I start doing that, and as I'm getting into the lines of numbers, I very quickly start getting lost in the numbers, and so I have to start over again, because I didn't have my good calculator with reverse Poirot's notation, if you know what that is. I had to use, a stupid calculator, and so I kept getting lost. And so then I'm like, stupid brain, and brain was saying, no, we're done. And I was saying, no brain, you do what you're told. Stupid brain. So I put on a pot of my very best coffee. This is the coffee that my dad grows. This is real Kona coffee. If you were to buy it in Toronto, it would be about $50 a pound. This is excellent coffee, my best. I save it for special occasions. So I brew my pot of coffee, and I pour it into my favorite winter mug, which is I picked up in Hawaii, and it has hula dancers around, dancing around the edge of it. It's very tame. It's very cool. Anyway, so I'm starting to drink the coffee, and I tell you though, I wasn't feeling the hula. The hula wasn't in the Tay. It was about 4:30 in the morning, and I can't get my head through these numbers, and I'm realizing that I still have to do a lot of other work on this vestry report, specifically write my portion of it, my report, and it just wasn't going to happen, because I could not get my brain to synthesize like 5, 6, 7 different reports to write my summary and kind of analysis of where we've been. So I'm sorry, folks, we are not having the annual vestry meeting after church today. We're going to punt it to next week when we'll be better prepared and we can go through it. If you really want to see if the raw reports, I can give those to you. If anybody just emails me, I can send those to you, like treasurer's report, things like that. But to have it all like together, my report and so forth together, just wasn't going to happen for today. So we're going to do it next week. However, I do want to take this chance to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done the last year and some of the things that I'm thinking about as I try to synthesize what has been an incredibly busy last 18 months or so. Incredibly busy. You may recall, if you were here, that last vestry meeting when we met, I had a really strong sense of conviction about what we had to do as a community to move forward and to try to grow as a community, right? And a lot of it had to do with trying to leverage creating new kinds of church on the peripheries of what we experience as kind of our community. In other words, what I wanted to do was form projects and missional endeavors that were just on the edge of us and them. That is to say, the community that surrounds us, right? So I recruited a bunch of people that were passionate about that. A few parishioners, but a lot of people from outside of this community that had a passion for this kind of work and particular expertises in things like business or food security and kind of other sorts of issues. And we started meeting, and these folks put in a tremendous amount of commitment to try to get this going. We had people we were meeting for like 2 or 3 hours every week on a weekday to talk about this community. Not just this church, but I mean the wider community of our neighborhood. And we did studies, and we interviewed people, and we did a lot of fact-finding and a lot of really excellent work. And out of that came a couple of really good little shoot plants that came up out of it. One of them, probably the most kind of glamorous in a sense, was the food market that we started at 250 Davenport, which is a Toronto community housing building in our neighborhood just a little ways away. And the idea here was when we asked people in the community what the biggest social need was, food security came up again and again. It is a major issue in this neighborhood where the only place to shop is basically either Whole Foods, or as we call it in my family, Whole Paycheck, or the local corner store. Those are kind of your options. And for folks on a limited income, who the folks in 250 Davenport are, that's not really much of a choice. They can take a cab, or they can take TTC out to a No Frills and then take a cab back. But that's not very practical for a lot of folks, and especially if they have any kind of mobility issues, which again, many of the people in that building do. So we decided we'd do this market, and we worked on it, we developed it, we launched it around June, and it was in the park and outside the building, and it was doing really well, and then it moved into the winter, and that was the real challenge. A lot of these markets actually close down in the winter time because it's so difficult to manage. And in fact, we did see a shrinking of the people that were coming to the market in terms of the people from the wider neighborhood. But the people in the building were adamant that it must continue. This was now the way that most of them, or a high proportion of them, are getting their fruits and vegetables on a weekly basis. This is a really important thing for them. So we committed to it, we kept on doing it, and it's basically succeeded. Now we're at the point where we've written for a Trillium grant. You know, when you buy a lottery ticket, that money goes into a fund called the Trillium Fund, and they use that to sponsor all kinds of different social good projects in Ontario, and one of them is food security things, and so we're in one of those, even those priority areas for that particular kind of grant. So we've written for that grant, and if we get it, it will secure the financial future of the market for the next 3 years. In other words, it won't cost us a dime to run that market for the next 3 years if we get that grant. And it's looking highly probable that we will. The Trillium Foundation came back to us with some specific questions, which is a good sign, and we responded to those questions. They just wanted some more detail about some of the ways that we measure things. So they wanted to know, they wanted us to give them better, more precise details around how many people are using the market, how much food we were actually selling, things like that. So we gave them that information, and we hope to hear a favorable response soon. So all that is great, okay? And this is exactly the kind of example of the sort of ministries that I think this church needs to do to be relevant to the neighborhood around it. Here's the problem, though, right? Is it church, okay? Because what's in danger of happening is we might be on the verge of creating a really excellent social service project that could spin off into its own thing. The church, not just the Anglican Church, has a long history of doing this. For both good and bad. The good part is that we've created the bones institutions that have matured and flourished into their own freestanding enterprises that help thousands and thousands of people. A good example in this case would be Witchwood Barns. You guys all know what Witchwood Barns is. It's a food hub just a little west of us. And Witchwood Barns started, you might not have known this, as an Anglican food bank in response to a particularly acute poverty crisis in that part of the city. I think it's St. Matthew's up there, I think. They founded this food bank, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. Started writing for grants and appointing a board and all that stuff. And it's beautiful, right? But it ain't church. Right? It's not very Christian. And for me, I always felt like the ambition that we had with the market goes a step beyond just simply feeding people's actual physical hunger and trying to feed other kinds of hunger. For example, one of the big issues in this neighborhood is the divide between the rich and the poor. Right? There's a great deal of divide along those lines, and when we look at the demographic trends in the neighborhood, in the city overall, in fact, also, we expect that trend to get worse, that separation between the rich and the poor, and the middle class just kind of dropping out of that chart, especially on this particular neighborhood, because we're right on the cusp of the kind of this kind of wealth that we see just to the north of us in Forest Hill is now kind of creeping into the annex. So I wanted to try to address some of that social isolation between groups. I also wanted to address some of the spiritual hunger that exists in these communities, and that's a very real thing. And especially when you talk to some of these folks, when you're doing their ring up of their vegetables and things like that, you'll often sort of hear stories or things will come up, and you realize that people are dealing with a lot of issues in that building. And I think they're dealing with a lot of issues outside of that building in the neighborhood as well. But a lot of those folks in the neighborhood are not going to come in here on a Sunday morning. So we have to figure out how to get out there. You see, the point of all these missional endeavors is not to get those people to come in here. The idea is to get you people out there, right? In other words, bringing church to the people where they are, in the social context that they exist, with the particular needs that they have. Right. So in the early days of the market, in the summer, we were fairly successful at having a good number of Messiah folks there. Frankly, that number has kind of trailed off as we've gone on. Now, part of the reason it's trailed off is simply the market doesn't need that kind of labor anymore. Like, none of us have to show up to make the market happen anymore. The reason for that is we've structured the market so that the very people that are being assisted by it are also the people that are making it run, right? And they're being compensated in the form of fruits and vegetables, right? With the exception of Sheena, our market manager, who's actually getting paid in dollars and cents, partly through a grant, partly through Messiah. But, as I said, we're hopefully going to have that completely off our shoulders next year. All right, so that was fine, but then the connect this community to that community have gotten quite tenuous. Basically, it's me, it's to some degree Sheena, and a few of you who shop at the market sometimes. And that's about it, right? And that worries me. And I've really been thinking about that the last couple of months. It's like, how do we change that? How do we kind of make our DNA, of our kind of interest, of the human flourishing beyond just the stomach, like the whole human flourishing, how do we kind of get that there if we don't have the people to do it? So you might recall that I had that magazine that I made, that food magazine that I did on a weekly basis. It was crazy for like 6 or 8 issues, something like that. And you know what? It wasn't sustainable. It was beautiful, but it wasn't sustainable. And I tried. I really tried to make it that way. I thought about selling advertising. I thought about, I pushed and I nagged people to submit articles to me to publish in it. But, and I got a few in the beginning, but again, it kind of trailed off, right? And I just didn't have the volunteer commitment to sustain the magazine. So it's kind of dropped off. I do want to revive it, maybe as a monthly thing. Eventually, I'll get there. But this is an example of how I have yet to crack this nut of how to reach we've now created a little community of people that are doing good, and we're reaching them with a really important ministry, but in what way are we reaching them with gospel values, if I can put it that way, right? So last week, or not last week, it was 2 weeks ago I think now, I had a meeting with Joe Cressy, who's the new city councilor for the area, and this is what he wanted to talk about, the market, right? And he loves the market. This is great. He's going to some of the meetings that have been happening around food security and the market. He knows about Church of the Messiah because of this market. This market is a really, really important thing that we're doing. Toronto Community Housing, one of our other partners in this project, is also really, really anxious to see this succeed. Food Share, the organization that has really helped us a lot with this as well, our other partner. Food Share says that our success in the first year is really unusual. Like looking at how many people are accessing the market, the fact that we're running in the wintertime and the numbers that we're having, like that we have nothing to be thinking that we're like, small. Like we're actually a thriving market from their perspective. And they do a lot of these markets. So this is all really good. But I want to challenge us in the next week before we actually have our annual vestry meeting to think about the ways that this project as an example, how we can as church engage the folks that we've successfully meeting on their turf. Like we are meeting people on their turf with all of their stuff. And we have to get better at being ourselves in that context. How do we do that? That's a real challenging thing. Because, for a lot of those folks, for me to show up and say, let's begin our market with prayer, right? There are some folks there that are going to have a real problem with that, right? So I got to be a lot more gentle. So doing things like including table graces in the magazine that I created, that was helpful. Like people really liked that. But I did get 1 or 2 complaints from some folks, right? Which was interesting, that we were trying to convert them or something, right? And so, interesting. So we have to kind of discover what those boundaries are and just kind of come up to them, right? And begin to kind of massage those relationships a bit. So I want to challenge us about that. Another thing I want to challenge us about had to do with the cafe idea. The most important idea, I thought the market was a great idea and a really important one, but I thought actually a more important and transformative kind of fresh expression for this church to launch would be creating a space of hospitality here in the church that would be open every day. There would be a place that would maybe serve coffee and croissants or something like that, donuts or I don't know. And it would be a place where people we could do all kinds of events like salons and we could have open mic nights and all kinds of fun things, game nights, and create cafe church. And there's a lot of models of how to do that. It's been done in a lot of places. It's a pretty well written about, established way to do church, especially to reach people that are uncomfortable with Sunday morning kind of church experience. So we spent a lot of time, our little committee, developing the plans for that. And we came up with excellent plans, right? And then we ran into a roadblock. The roadblock was that for us to actually implement the plan we had developed, we would need an infusion of one of two things. Either a lot of volunteer time or capital in the form of money. Those were our choices, right? And we just couldn't get it together. We couldn't get the volunteer commitment to make the cafe happen. And we kind of thought that might be the case. That's okay, we're a small congregation. But we thought maybe we can borrow capital against the funds that we have in reserve, all right, to capitalize this market, which after a couple of months, hopefully will be self-sustained and ongoing, right? So we went to the diocese and we applied for these funds, and they were very impressed with our business case and all that stuff. But they put a condition on us. They said that for us to access that money, we would have to be completely out of debt with the diocese. And at that point, we then rented daycare space. We had racked up some debt with the diocese, and we just haven't been able to catch up on that yet, right? And we probably won't be able to catch up with that until we have that space rented. That's just how it is. So that project ran into a wall, right? And I thought for a while, I'm just going to hoist the pirate flag. I'm going to dam the torpedoes. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a phase 0 to the project that requires 0 capitalization and 0 volunteer hours. What I was going to do was just brew coffee in our kitchen, take it out onto the street, and sell it, right? And yes, that's legit by the Toronto Health Code. You can do that. We're a church. We can get away with that. Seriously. I was all set to do that. But then reality struck in the form of my 5-year-old, my commitments, my life. And I just could not conceive of how I would get up early on Saturday morning and come out here and do that, especially once the weather started getting cold, right? So at first it was like, let's start that next week, right? And then I just eventually realized I have hit peak Tay. The maximum of my capacity to do stuff, to do ministry, to do all the crazy things that I do to try to grow this church and to reach people with the gospel, I had reached the limitations of what that could do. And beyond that step lies Coffee Cafe, right? And I did try to recruit volunteers in various ways, and they looked at that level of commitment, and they said, no thanks, and I don't blame them at all, right? I needed somebody who was really passionate about hospitality to do that. So the cafe thing kind of went on the back burner. The last one I want to talk about, a fresh expression that we worked on, which has had a kind of interesting life and potential success, was the Messiah Media idea. Here the concept was that we would make this a hub of pioneering ministry around leveraging new forms of media, such as social media, videography, these kinds of things, web presence, Twitter, you name it, to try to reach people, right? And so we started things like live streaming the services. Of course, I've had the sermons up for a long time, but now it's actually having live services, doing things like producing videos about different subjects, and that's had a very interesting life. For one thing, these videos that we do, more people view them online than are actually present here, right? But again, unfortunately, this doesn't mean bums in pews, right? The fact that people are engaging what we're doing on a Sunday morning at home in the comfort of their house with their kitty cat on their lap or however they do it. And I don't know much about these people, but I'm fascinated to find out more. And in some cases, like the Christmas Eve service has been viewed hundreds of times. The Christmas Eve service, remember, there was not that many people here, but there were hundreds of people that viewed that online. So how do we categorize that? Is that a success in the sense that we've reached a lot of people with the beauty of what we have to offer in our community? Or is it a failure in the sense that it has not resulted in anybody coming to church? I don't know. Good, interesting question. Another example of something similar is because of some of the visibility that we've created around some of these projects, the National Anglican Church asked me to do a series of meditations for Lent. Okay? So the first one went up on Ash Wednesday. Within 24 hours, that 3-minute video that I made, which I shot in here at night and had a friend do the voiceover for and so on, that video in the first 24 hours got viewed more than 2,000 times on Facebook alone. And we estimate another 2,000 or 3,000 through the email subscription list that people had signed up for, and also through just plain old YouTube. So it's something on the order of 4,000, 5,000 times within the first 24 hours, that little video that I made. Right? However, at the Ash Wednesday service here, we had 14 people, right? 4 of whom were basically staff, right? Many of whom three of whom were people that we know but are very much on the periphery of our congregation. They only come a couple times a year, right? Three of those. So, and the choir, right? So again, Ash Wednesday. Do we consider that the ministries that we did around Ash Wednesday a success? Because we literally, through our efforts, reached thousands of people, right? Or do we consider it problematic because when we gathered as this congregation, we only had 14 folks, right? So this is what's keeping me up late at night. And this is the nut that I'm trying to crack in my head, is where do these things connect? Where do these things connect? I don't know. I don't know. And I'm really hoping that this community can help me figure that out, okay? So in the next week, that's what I want us to think about. How do we connect these peripheral ministries that I've been able to create, right, to the things that are happening here on Sunday morning? And I'm doing this not because I want to make anybody feel guilty. I'm not asking you guys to change your lifestyle to accommodate these ministries. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if what we're doing here as a community has value and we want to share it with others, we need to figure out how to do that together in a way that makes sense. Because what we're doing right now doesn't quite make sense yet. There's a disconnect. And I want to resolve that. So think about that over the next week. We're not going to have response times. I've gone a while. So, but just think about that. Give me your input. I'd like to hear more about your thoughts about that. We might have some meetings around it to kind of discuss it as well. I'm very open to input. I'm sure the wardens are as well. And we'll keep working on it. But it's been a really crazy busy but crazy productive year and a half that we've been working on this. And I want to thank the wardens who have worked really, really hard, and all the kind of key core volunteers, which is just about everybody here actually at one point or another. So thank you for the really hard work that went into making everything happen this last year. And we'll discuss more about those ministries when we gather again next week. So continuing with our service, let us rise together and say the Apostles' Creed, which is on page 6 of your leaflets. Let us confess our faith as we say, "We trust in one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen. We trust in one